Welcome to the NoPo podcast with your hosts, NoPo founder Vera Gibbons, media commentator Mitch Roschelle, and radio host John Iannuzzi. NoPo, news without the noise.
Welcome, everyone, to the NoPo podcast. I'm Vera Gibbons, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-hosts, Mitch Roschelle and John Iannuzzi, who just celebrated a birthday yesterday, so happy birthday. I was initially thinking we would start the show by talking about the J&J vaccine, the blood clot story, because I have a couple of relatives down here who had the J&J shot. They didn't have any ramifications, but it is a big story. So I thought maybe we'd do that. Then I thought, maybe we'll talk about the markets hitting an all-time high. But as you very well know, Bernie Madoff just died. He was serving a 150-year-long prison sentence, and he tried to get out a couple of times and didn't have any success doing that. But so he passed away, and then Mitch, our chief booking operating officer, made a very timely booking and booked, drumroll please, Jim Campbell. Mitch, do you want to introduce Jim Campbell, who is waiting in the wings?
Absolutely. So Jim Campbell is a business consultant, a radio host, a raconteur. I don't even know what a raconteur is, but it sounded really good as I'm looking at your face. And I guess about a decade ago, and Jim could give the details, started doing some research into Bernie Madoff. And he wrote a book that comes out on April 27th. Now, April 27th is a very important day because not only is it the day that Jim Campbell's book comes out, but it also happens to be Vera Gibbons' birthday. And you know why I know it's Vera Gibbons' birthday?
Yeah, I know.
Because it also is my twin's birthday. And as well as Chris Cimino, who was our first guest on the NoPo podcast, but then I digress. Anyway, so Jim Campbell's book will be shipped on the 27th. It's available for pre-order, and he will give us all the details. But no more timely guest has ever fallen on our laps than our friend Jim Campbell. So without any further ado, Jim, welcome to the NoPo podcast.
Yay! Congratulations on the book. It's called Madoff Talks. As Mitch mentioned, it's out on the 27th, just a couple of weeks. So tell us all about it. I mean, I read about it. It sounds amazing. You devoted so many years to getting this researched and out, and all the interviews you did with the Madoff family. Tell us more.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for getting me on here. It took me to publish a book to get invited on the NoPo podcast. So this is like the major leagues for me. And last night I was on Rita Cosby at WABC at 11:20, which is way past my bedtime. So if I'm rather incoherent this morning, you guys might forgive me. But anyway, yeah, the book Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, coming from McGraw Hill on April 27th. It was 12 years in the making, a lot of time in the wilderness. We even had trouble getting a publisher to be interested. But when my next agent signed a deal within 1 week, which is pretty impressive. And, it is all very fortuitous for me. I was interviewing Lori Sandell, who wrote a book on the Madoff family. She said, do you want to speak for part of your prep off the record with Andrew Madoff? I said, sure. I found him stunningly open when I started off attacking him right away. And the show I was doing was live then. And he said, well, what you're saying to me, I'm going to listen tomorrow and see if you say it on the radio tomorrow. After that, he then, fortuitous number two, his mother, Ruth Madoff, happened to be moving to Old Greenwich, where I live. So I said, Andy, I'll take her out. No one else is really going to want to see her for, when she first gets here. And we hit it off. She comes in. First of all, it's the middle of winter and she's wearing sunglasses even inside the restaurant. So she wasn't too comfortable, being noticed. Very strikingly attractive woman at 75, I believe, then. And the first thing I noticed was she ate her chef salad like she hadn't eaten in a month. Totally open, totally trusted me. We walk out the front door and I say, Ruth, can I get a picture? She goes, oh my God, you're wired, aren't you? So I had to convince her I was not wired. She introduced me to Bernie through the prison email system. And Bernie told me that since Andy and Ruth had vouched for me, he was going to trust me to get the real story out. Interesting that he said that, because Andy Madoff, when he found out from Bernie December 10th, the afternoon before he was arrested, when Bernie confessed to the family, Andy never said another word to his father, not one word, the rest of his life. But Bernie said because Andy vouched for me, he was going to talk to me. So it was an interesting thing. And then the rest was, it was just on from there. The man is a brilliant, total recall. He's likable, and he tells an occasional lie, unfortunately. Very, very delusional. He could not accept any losses, which is at the core of his problem. And I'll just say, then I'll stop and let you shoot questions. The fundamental thing that blows me away is that you would think what happened was he was running, and Mitch will know this, an extremely honest, ethical, above the norm on Wall Street business that had come from nothing, broke the monopoly of the New York Stock Exchange, raised to number 3. And then I figured, well, he must have run into some trouble, made the classic gambler's mistake, doubled down. We'll do this for a while. We'll get the money back and get out of it. He did tell me a story along those lines, which he had not told anybody else. But it turns out, after I vetted everything, that he built on the 19th floor this incredibly pristine business with top-level graduates, Wall Street leading innovative technology. At the same time, on the 17th floor behind lock and key, he had unsophisticated high school graduates and built it off an archaic IBM AS400. Side by side, one of the cleanest businesses with the biggest criminal enterprise in Wall Street history. Go figure.
Jim, we talked on the air about this. What was that first correspondence with Bernie Madoff like? Dear Bernie.
Well, you have to get approved by the prison system and Bernie. So we had to go through that. And then, he was still calling and emailing Ruth. She was estranged from him at that time and didn't like hearing from him. In fact, she kept facilitating this because she liked me at the time. So the first stuff was more like back and forth, establishing terms. I said that, I'm going to have to vet every single word you say. So, just make sure that you're comfortable with that. This is, I think, your chance to talk to history. And, we'll go for there. And it was no hold barred. He would answer any question I asked. And I mean, sometimes 6-7 page single spaced handwritten letters, and then other times emails, about 400 pages in total. This is kind of emblematic of Bernie. He wrote a 1-page letter to Andrew and his partner, Catherine Hooper, that she gave me that says, "I'm so sorry, Dad." Not even love Dad, but Dad. And that's a nice apology, but one sentence. The same time, he's writing a guy he doesn't know, 6 pages, single-spaced rationalizations of the whole deal. So he's an interesting guy. He's not a pure sociopath, but I'll go back to John's great at firing questions off the cuff at me.
No, Jim, I just wanted to clarify one thing there, or have you expand on it. Do you think you were the only person who was communicating with him like this, that he wanted to tell the story to?
No, not at all. He was communicating with others. I was, as by his admission, the deepest, longest term running relationship he had. And I went into the biggest detail, but he was initially he was compelled to try to talk this out. And at the end, Ruth herself agreed she would talk to nobody else but me, which was nice. She honored that. She talked from Laurie Sandel's book. She talked to 60 Minutes briefly. She did not like Laurie's book. She was forced to do it by Andy and Catherine. She did not like the 60 Minutes interview, but she honored. By the time I got with her, that she would talk.
How did you gain her trust there? I mean, obviously she liked you enough to have lunch with you regularly.
The Cobb salad, which she devoured.
I don't know. Iannuzzi knows me better than anybody. I guess I was able to. She seemed to trust me right away.
How? Why?
Vera, Jim interviews. I don't want to say unsavory, but all types of folks. I mean, people who've been accused of some really heinous things.
Wait, Jim has interviewed me about 10 times. Am I included in that category?
No, but honestly, I mean, with our forensic, we do a forensic show. And on the forensic show, Jim is capable of interviewing people who've been accused of some really wild crimes without casting aspersions, without making his own judgment. And I think they recognize that. I mean, everyone, what did Carrick say to you, Jim?
It was the best interview he'd ever done after 300.
And this was when the S was hitting the fan for him.
Yeah, let me tell you what I find too is that if you ask tough questions in a respectful way, you'd be amazed that people answer it. You know, I had to ask a CEO who was accused of having an affair with Rumi Khan, who was in the Raj Rajaratnam insider trading. And after we got off the air, I said, I'm really sorry I had to ask that. He said, no, you absolutely did have to ask it.
So did you meet Bernie in person at any point in this period, or was it all electronic?
The prison blocked me. They thought I was a security risk, like I was some kind of financial ISIS guy. And they first did block in midstream our email contact. Bernie was upset. He told Ruth to tell me. So I went to the warden and I said, what's going on? I can appeal. They let me appeal. They turned me down. I appealed twice. They turned me down. So I said, well, I interview our Connecticut senators a lot, and Senator Blumenthal's on the Judiciary Committee, and they oversee the DOJ, which oversees the BOP, and they turned me back on the next day.
I thought Ruth and Bernie were not speaking, but Ruth was still speaking to him throughout this whole. Am I wrong with that? I thought that she stopped speaking to him at some point during this.
No, she was estranged from him. She wanted basically nothing to do with him, but he was emailing her, and he was calling her. And I have to say this though, Ruth can never totally decouple from him. They started dating at 13. She was essentially a cult-like controlled figure when especially all the way up until it ended, and it took a long time for her to be deprogrammed. She was very hurt. She told me at lunch, she asked me if I knew that he'd had affairs, and it was really uncomfortable to be asked that question, but she was pretty devastated by that. She is, I love Ruth because I think she's a very good person inherently, but she's a little bit more inscrutable than that. I mean, I don't want to say she was acting to some degree with me, but she's protective of Bernie to an extent, and I don't think she'd ever really totally walk away from. Now, interestingly, she supported the book when the prison tried to cut us off. She re-engineered it and everything. The day I get the contract from McGraw Hill, I say, Ruth, it's happened, blah, blah, blah. She says, Jim, I don't want to talk. Lucky I had everything, but it would have been helpful because in my investigation, I learned new things. Like, amazingly, she was still balancing the infamous 703 account in the year before the Ponzi went down. That's the JP Morgan account that held the Ponzi scheme assets. And I wish that, if I would like to have talked to her about that. But I have to respect her privacy. It was about the time Bernie was applying for compassionate early release. So obviously any kind of publicity would not have been good. And, eventually, the last time Bernie and I communicated, he said, Jim, the family's asked me to shut my mouth. So I only want to talk non-Ponzi business. And if you want to come down and visit me as a friend, we can do that. So I applied to the prison system finally again as a friend, and they came back. This guy's writing a book. No.
Jim, you said that fortunately you had enough. At what point in the process did you realize that you did truly have enough? And then did you end up with enough for 2 books?
McGraw Hill was told to contemplate 4 books out of it, because if you read the book, it's almost 10 episodes, but you could do a book on the regulatory failure alone. You could do it on the victims. I have 30 reforms, I suggest. There's the Bernie story. There's the chapter 8, which says, did the family know? And there's the chapter 9, Bernie on the couch.
That chapter 8 seems to be getting a lot of attention. You were on Bloomberg this week, and after you got off the line, they debated for about a half an hour that chapter. People are very conflicted about whether or not the family knew.
Yeah, most people think
it gets people agitated. It really whips people into a frazzle.
Yeah, I'm not telling people either. I'm telling so that they can get the book. But we're trying to. I just want to tease it, and then hopefully it'll incentivize people buying it. I don't know if CBS is going to try and force me to say. So, we'll see, because in my perspective, it's not the most important thing in the book at all. In fact, the architecture of the systemic failure is the most important part. The sex is with Bernie, I understand, and everybody wants to know about Ruth. Interestingly, this American Express statement that that are pictured now in all these articles, I sent to somebody, and it's now all over the world. They sent me one in French, and all I could recognize was my name. And the fact that and by the way, I'm embarrassed because I took 4 years of French at 3 years at Tufts. So obviously,
yeah.
But anyway,
French too. No, I can't speak a word of it. But anyway, continue.
And
Jim.
Yeah, anyway, so this thing is going out, and now everybody's debating that that issue, which isn't even a prime Ponzi knowledge issue, but I understand it's something that's interesting, and I feel bad about that for Ruth, by the way, because that's just going to make it look worse than it is. Now, if you ask me, she should not have been charging $50,000 a month on the corporate credit card, but that's not indicative that she knew it was a Ponzi scheme.
No.
Not necessarily.
It's indicative that she thought her husband was successful and the money was coming in and it was flowing and they were going to parties. They had a nice social life out in the Hamptons. I mean, she's just spending like a typical housewife of a wealthy guy.
Vera, that's nicely said. It's indicative of that they used the place like a piggy bank.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was other people's money.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it always? I wrote down 3 things on my note sheet here. One was, did they know? So I'm not going to ask you that question, Jim, because we want people to buy the book, and that's chapter 8. I wrote down Shawshank, and I want to come back to that as my question. But I also wrote down victims, and you mentioned victims. And I'm going to tie Vera into this question a little bit. Did you spend much time talking to victims? And I'm curious how victims felt about Bernie after the fact.
I spent a lot of time with victims, and I spent a lot of time with Bernie on his victims, and I even spent time with Bernie on some of the named victims who were hurt. And by the way, here's an interesting story. One of the victims actually lives in Armonk, I think. Her son told her she'd heard Bernie had been arrested. She calls in and answers the phone, Bernie's secretary. And of course, she's desperate. She hears chaos in the background. She hears the name Peter, get me something. And so she thought it was Peter Madoff, but she got right through. Okay. And I then, 2 years, whenever I started, went to Eleanor, his secretary, and said if she remembered this, because we wanted to know if Peter Madoff was, what was going on here? Was Peter covering something up? And it turns out she said the story is actually absolutely true. The Peter, though, was somebody else getting her an ink cartridge, because you have to send in a form saying, I want to close my account. So these things were coming in like it was a barrage. And of course, the accounts were already frozen anyway. Right. And she lost all her money except for about 84,000, I think.
So tying in Vera, who's down in Palm Beach, and I know a lot of
Palm Beach.
Bernie's victims are there. What's the sentiment right now in Palm Beach, Vera, with this story being in the cycle again?
Well, it's funny because I was jogging on the bike trail the other day, and they have these boat tours that go up and down the lake there on the lake trail, and they were talking about Bernie on the boat tour, and they were saying, oh, this is where the famous swindler Bernie Madoff used to. So I was sort of eavesdropping but sort of listening to my music at the same time. I didn't hear any mention of Jim's new book, but they were definitely talking about Madoff on the boat. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it down here because obviously a lot of people at the beach club in Palm Beach got burned by Bernie Madoff, and they some of them have rebounded and some of them have not. So,
and Jim, on the victim front, for one last question, he seemed to have preyed on groups of people, and was it Bernie who had gotten in and just kind of, once he was in, preyed on people, or organically did certain sort of ecosystems of people automatically sort of push Bernie? Like, I know where he lived in Long Island, he belonged to Glen Oaks Country Club, and he kind of got into Glen Oaks Country Club. He got into a lot of Jewish charities. He got into the Palm Beach world, and then it spread almost like a virus. Was it Bernie spreading it, or was it like a virus where it went from host to host?
First off, it was essentially a Jewish affinity crime. And within the Jewish community, which I'm obviously not an expert on, betrayal of folks within that community is an unpardonable sin, which is part of the reason he had so much trust. Now, we could do a separate show on 2 issues related to what you said. Number one, it did spread like that, but the feeder funds were the ones that ended up driving this whole thing and fighting over getting access into Bernie, and even to the extent of allowing him to script their answers with regulators and investors. And another show on how the SIPC Madoff trustee abused victims again. And to me, this is still one of the most amazing things that isn't really understood. SIPC is like FDIC, supposed to provide protection for you, right? Well, the SIPC fund had very little money in it. And do you know where they got the money to claw back? They went after, and every Madoff guy lost their money. They went after a subset of Madoff investors to take money back from them to give to another subset of Madoff investors. The SIPC essentially sidestepped their role in a brilliant move. The investors that had taken out more money than they'd put in, they clawed back. Investors that had taken out less than they put in, they were able to recede. And so you had to be...
Yeah, was their goal there, Jim, to get everybody to get their principal back? Was that what they were trying to accomplish?
And that's another scandal, kind of. The principal was about 19.5 billion, and of course, the what they saw in their statements, which is what you and I believe the securities industry is telling us. What we have was 65 billion. So the SIPC trustee measures himself on getting back first to 19.5 billion. He's taken 2 billion in fees and expenses, and 7 billion of that 14 came from one person who Madoff put the arm on to get most out of it.
Jim, we interviewed a bunch of different victims. Were there any one specific victim story that haunted you?
Well, you know, this guy was a feeder fund, actually, but not a victim. But he, René Thierry-Magnon, a big French guy who had all this European royalty in it. And he's the first guy the whistleblowers could tell in 5 minutes, this is too good to be true. And he said, no, I totally trust Bernie. I'm only with Bernie. He lost 1.5 billion of his investors' money, and he slashed his wrists and killed himself in New York City 2 weeks to the day after Bernie was arrested.
I don't remember that guy. Huh? Where's the brother? Is the brother...
Peter Madoff just got out of prison, I'm told, last year. I asked Bernie how they were getting along, and Bernie said they had no communication.
Okay.
Now, you know, there's also sadness. Mark Madoff killed himself 2 years to the day after his arrest. Yeah. And I knew Andrew, and I watched him die over several years, including meeting him at lunch in Greenwich and being stunned when he walked out totally bald from chemotherapy. And the boys were, you know, basically, he destroyed his family, obviously, as well as all these victims. Now, ironically, I say he's not a pure sociopath. He has a lot of resentment towards his victims because he was a people pleaser who couldn't say no. So he said, these guys were relentless. They're greedy. They're always asking me for stuff. And he felt that they pressured him. On the Palm Beach Country Club, he told me, he says, you know, Jim, 10 of these heavy hitters were sitting around a table and they're all going, you know, do you think Madoff cheated to get this done? Ha, ha, ha. You know, we don't care. He's our crook because we're getting the money. So then there's Bernie essentially blaming them.
Jim, as I've been writing a lot of stories about this, and outside of the fact that it's named after a guy named Ponzi, what exactly is a Ponzi scheme? Like, how does it work?
Okay. It means there's no real investment activity going on. And the investors that are coming in, right, are basically paying the investors that are going out. So you always have to have more guys coming in than going out. It would have lasted forever if the markets hadn't crashed, to be honest. And it's as simple as that. You know, we come in and we take Mitch's money, and then John Iannuzzi's leaving out the back door. So Mitch's money is really going to John. Okay. Now, what Madoff was really doing, what I call in the book a reverse Robin Hood, was he was taking money from average folks that had been investing with him for 40 years that didn't have a lot of money, and he was giving it to his rich big four guys he was giving guaranteed rates of back then 20-30% a year, and he gave his other guys 10, 11, 12%. So he was doing a reverse Robin Hood, and the money was coming in so much that there was no way that it was going to end. I kept saying I could never figure out why he had no exit strategy because it made no sense. And he's a brilliant guy and a fraud. And I totally understood his psychology, but I felt I got to talk to a professional one, and she said the exit strategy was that he was going to die at some point and it would have worked until then.
Assuming he didn't get arrested. We're getting short on time, Jim.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, literally,
this is fascinating.
We're going to rebook you when you're done with your Whirlwind Media Tour because we find the story fascinating, as will our listeners. I wrote down on my note here, Shawshank. And when Bernie Madoff was arrested, in my view, I viewed him as being like the Shawshank Redemption character, which is all of these folks in prison would be fascinated with him, and he'd somehow, become fraudster 2.0 in prison somehow. Was that right? What was he like in prison relative to his other?
That is utterly brilliant. Number one, I want to be honest, we didn't spend much time talking about that, but it's utterly brilliant because everybody that's asked me that is saying, like, was he beat up in prison? Was he hated? Was he ostracized? No, he had the con going down there. They thought he was cool. How do you pull this off? They thought he was kind of a stud. Now he's been sick for a long time and in the hospital, section of it, but that's right. I think they kind of viewed that. And, when I say he's a con, he's the anti-con, which is why he's so effective as a con. I'll take President Trump. He is a very out front type of con.
No politics.
Yeah, we're going to cut that out.
I'm sorry.
We're going to cut that out.
Let's switch over to talk about Ruth real quickly, because I know people are fascinated by Ruth and what she's up to now. Were you showing her chapters of the book, Jim, along the way, or were you sharing?
No.
Nothing.
No,
Has she seen the book? Has she seen the book?
No, she's not seen the book. Not only that, Andy's partner was a nice source. A lot of it off the record. By the way, she emailed me yesterday and said, Jim, I hope you sell 65 billion copies. And you know where she got that number from, which was pretty nice. Nobody in the family has seen the book. She has not seen it. She worshipped that Andy was innocent, and she said, Jim, if you find he's not, go ahead and do it.
You still speaking to her, Rose?
I told you, she sent me an email yesterday saying she hopes I sell 65 billion.
Jim, what about the most important lady, and that's the one that's above your head? Your wife stood with you all these years while you OCD'd this. Really, I mean, this was your life for a decade, right? I mean, what is Mary, your wife, Mary Campbell, happy that this has reached its culmination?
And are you still married?
Oh yeah, she's still there.
I'm kidding.
By the way, that's an ongoing question about when she gets rid of me. So anyway, I call her MRC, as everybody knows. I'll read you the both dedications to Dad, who gave me the moral foundation Bernie Madoff so sincerely lacked, and to MRC, who delayed some of her dreams so I might pursue mine. It's your turn. And to the Madoff victims who became survivors.
Good stuff.
There is not a better way to end our show than with what you just read. Jim, you will forever be a friend of the NoPo podcast. If it wasn't for Jim Campbell, we wouldn't have the NoPo podcast, because you're the person who introduced me to John, and we brought this whole thing together. So we couldn't be happier for you. Congratulations. In life, timing is everything, and you've got lightning in the bottle. And thanks for giving us a half an hour, because I know you probably have a gazillion media opportunities, and we couldn't be happier for you. Congrats on the book. It comes out on April 27th, which is Vera's birthday. Jim, real quickly, the title of the book again and where people can find it.
Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, from McGraw Hill. One statistic: last week it was number 837,000 on Amazon. Yesterday it hit 217, and it's number one in every financial category.
And we look forward to it being number one in the nonfiction category. Congrats, Jim. Thanks for joining us, and for everybody listening, thank you. You've listened to Jim Campbell on the NoPo podcast.